everybody, welcome back and get ready for awesomeness because today we're taking a look at Twinkle Star Sprites on the Sega Dreamcast, which I think the alternate title should have just been fun because that's all this game is. It's like somebody found a way to concentrate fun into a solid form and made it into a disc. This Dreamcast version was released in 2000, but there are a ton of ports that were released in the mid to late 90s for the Neo Geo systems, the Sega Saturn, and the PlayStation 2, and there was even a sequel made for the PS2 in 2005. It was developed by the consistently great ADK and published by SNK, and it's easily one of my new favorite Neo Geo games and Dreamcast games simultaneously. Twinkle Star Sprites can best be described as a one-on-one shoot-'em-up crossed with a puzzle game, or at least that's how I've always heard it described, but honestly, it's much more of a shooter with some light puzzle elements. Basically, the point of the game is to kill all of the enemies that appear on your side of the screen, and the better you do, the more hell you send over to your opponent's side, and this back and forth goes on until one side is no more. The puzzle aspect comes into play in that by destroying specific enemies, you can cause a chain reaction that destroys a bunch more, thus earning you big combos and sending more enemies to your opponent's side. Getting hit by enemies not only reduces your health, but also equally replenishes the health of your opponent, so some matches can last quite a long time and get really insane. There are 3 gameplay modes to choose from. The story mode, which has you going through 7 stages as the game's young female protagonist trying to find the Twinkle Star and make her Sailor Moon-like transformation. The other 2 modes are Arcade and Versus, where you can choose from the game's 9 characters that all have different stats, fire modes, and bombs. It's important to note that when you use your bombs, you clear the screen of enemies, but only the ones that were sent from your opponent's side will be returned to them. So it's best to wait until they send over a lot of enemies before using one. There's definitely some strategy to be had here, but for the most part, you'll be shooting like mad and frantically trying to avoid incoming enemies. Overall, the gameplay in Twinkle Star Sprites is incredibly fun and addictive. It's very hard to put this one down, and really, why would you want to? This is also a game with some amazing presentation, from the excellent soundtrack to the almost seizure-inducingly colorful visuals. This is almost akin to staring at a slot machine or something. There's constantly a lot of activity and a collage of colors that's all very pleasing to the eyes and perfectly complements the very fun gameplay. And at the same time, the soundtrack complements them both. The music is very high energy, lighthearted, and just sounds fun, if that makes sense. It all comes together to create a very attractive game that's almost as fun to look at and listen to as it is to play. This is a great game that I can easily recommend playing. Like I said, it's crazy fun and one of my new favorite Dreamcast games. The only downside is that copies of this game, regardless of which platform you're buying for, can be pretty high, anywhere from 70 bucks to almost 200. It was made available on the Wii Virtual Console, but only in Japan, and on PSN, which I'm not really sure about. It's also available on GameTap of all places, so you have plenty of options to get either a physical or digital copy. If you can spare the cash though, I can easily recommend picking up the Dreamcast version, which is one of the cheaper ones typically. Whatever the case may be though, go out of your way to play fun, also known as Twinkle Star Sprites. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we've got a cat fight on our hands because we're taking a look at Arcana Heart 3 for the Xbox 360. This game is a joint effort between series developer Examu and the mighty Arc System Works, who served as the publisher on this one. Both this and the PS3 version were released in Japan only in 2009, but it was released in North America and Europe in 2011 via the PlayStation Network. It features an all-female cast and a rather sizable roster of 23 characters and just as many quote-unquote arcana to choose from, which are kind of like the girls' spirit animals, I guess. There's a story concerning a bunch of mystic crystals being used to bring a celestial weapon called Odin into our world, which you get the pleasure of fighting at the end of the game's story mode, which I must admit makes for a pretty awesome boss fight. Like I said, in the Arcana Heart series, you choose your character first, and then you choose an Arcana, each of which provides you with some unique special abilities. Even though this game wasn't actually developed by Arc, it has a lot of similarities to many of their 2D fighters. The gameplay is very fast and combo heavy, with 3 attack buttons and a button that essentially works as a quick dash that drains a bit off of your super combo meter. And in general, if you've played a lot of other 2D fighters, then you should feel right at home here. And speaking of the super combo meter, each character has at least a couple of super moves that take 1 stock to perform, and a super damaging critical heart attack that can only be performed when you have 3 stocks available, and it drains all 3. So in these ways, Arcana Heart operates like most any other modern 2D fighter. What sets Arcana Heart apart from other 2D fighters is the aforementioned Arcana that give you a number of special abilities that are limited by the force gauge underneath your character's portrait. For starters, you can use the Arcana Burst ability, which is good for getting you out of combos. You also have the Extend Force ability, which enters you into a powered up state and drains the energy from your force gauge at the same time. And while in this state, you can perform the ultra powerful Arcana Blaze attack that does a ton of damage and looks super cool, with each Arcana having its own unique one. But if you miss this attack, you're instantly returned to your normal state. This feature basically makes it like you have 2 super move meters and twice as many special abilities you can pull off. This, combined with the already fast-paced gameplay, makes for some really frantic and fun matches with a ton of possibilities for stringing together long combos and pulling off some super flashy moves. And overall, I think Arcana Heart 3 is at least in the same league as games like Guilty Gear and Blaze Blue. It's really fun. It's also a very well made game in terms of presentation. The graphics are really good, there's a lot of really great animation and detail on all of the stages and characters, and the character designs themselves are also nice. There's a lot of variation among their looks, and the cutesy anime style looks really nice too. Also, all of the super moves and the Arcana Blaze attacks in particular are really cool looking and over the top. It's all very pleasing to the eyes. The sound design is also great. The soundtrack is a mix between techno and speed metal tracks, and it's really upbeat and fast-paced, which perfectly matches the gameplay. There's also plenty of super cutesy voice work all throughout the game, which you may or may not care for, but I personally don't mind. On the whole, both the graphics and sound design are really good, and again, it's comparable to some of ARC's more popular fighters. So, I can easily recommend this series, and this game in particular, to fighting game fans. Like I said, aside from the 360 version, Arcana Heart 3 is also available on PSN, and you can pick up the updated version called Arcana Heart 3 Love Max on the PS3 and PS Vita, which are both region free. And more good news, copies of this game, regardless of what system you're buying it for, are pretty reasonably priced. Usually somewhere between $20 and $30 on average. So if you're a fighting game fan and haven't tried this series yet, then definitely do. It's pure, furious female fighting action. Check it out. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at the bullet hell shooter extravaganza, known as Trigger Heart Excelica for the Dreamcast. This game was developed and published by Warashi, though the arcade version was actually published by Sega, and it was released in 2007. Just like Chaos Field, Raturgy, and a whole host of other shooters, this is a game that was released on the Dreamcast well after its demise, and while it never had a physical release outside of Japan, it was made available on Xbox Live Arcade in 2008, with updated visuals but missing a couple of gameplay modes. On the surface, Trigger Heart Excelica is a fairly standard bullet hell shooter in that it's very challenging and often visually cluttered by an obnoxious amount of bullets. You have two characters to choose from who have two different shot types and screen-clearing bombs. One feature that sets this game apart, though, is the anchor shot ability, which allows you to latch on to enemies. When you've got a hold of them, you can use them as a shield and rack up some bonus points in the process, or the more obvious option, use them as a projectile. You can actually swing your enemies around like a hammer throw and launch them in whatever direction you want. You will need to get accustomed to the momentum though, which changes with the size of each enemy, and larger enemies do take longer to capture. For enemies that can't be captured, you can use your anchor to lock onto them and deal a little extra damage. Aside from the anchor ability, this is just an all-around fun and challenging shooter. three gameplay modes to choose from: the original arcade mode, the even more difficult arrange mode, and the story mode, which tells the tale of the two playable characters, Excelica and Cruel Tear, who are warped to Earth from their home galaxy, where they were at war with an army of robots. And now that war has been brought to Earth, where the robots are led by Tear, the evil Triggerheart. The story mode and the arrange mode were both removed from the XBLA version. Regardless of which mode you're playing, this is a really enjoyable game. It's very challenging, though there are a few different difficulty levels and even a training mode to get you acclimated. The anchor shot is a cool mechanic that mixes the gameplay up a bit. Though I personally play mostly without using it, I did think it was pretty cool. Overall, while this game doesn't get the recognition that some other Dreamcast shooters like Ikaruga or Gigawing do, I think it definitely should, because it's a lot of fun and it plays really well. The graphics are really the only area where I think Triggerheart Excelica falls a little flat. They're not bad, but they are kind of bland. There isn't really a ton of color aside from the bullets, and the stages aren't really very elaborate in their design. The enemy designs are kind of stock as well, but I do like the large boss enemies, and the designs of the Triggerhearts themselves are pretty cool. It's a very well drawn anime style, so not bad graphics, just not very impressive. I usually like my shooters to look a little flashier. I do like the soundtrack though. It's pretty much non-stop techno and synth music, which, while I typically don't listen to those styles of music by themselves, they do complement shooters rather well. So on the whole, the production quality does get a thumbs up from me, but not a strong thumbs up. This one's really all about the gameplay. I can comfortably recommend this game to shooter fans. It's fun and really well made. Copies of the Dreamcast version can be rather expensive online, usually somewhere between $80 and $100, but there is an updated version on the PS2 called Triggerheart Excelica Enhanced, and it's actually much cheaper, usually about $30 or so. Plus, like I said, it's also available on XBLA, so you've got some options if you'd like to give this one a try. And really, why wouldn't you? It's a shooter starring anime girls in form-fitting fighter ships. It's Triggerheart Excelica, and it's pretty rad. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Magical Chase on the PC Engine, a game that more than anything is known for being rare and valuable. But we're going to disregard all of that for now and just focus on whether or not it's a good game. It was developed by Palsoft and published by Quest, first in Japan in 1991 and later in North America in 1993. It centers around a little witch named Ripple, who's trying to catch 6 demons she accidentally released from a cursed book that belongs to her teacher, and she's accompanied by 2 little star maidens that look more or less like a couple of star men from Mario Brothers. It's been pointed out that Magical Quest resembles the Cotton series to a certain extent, which is true, but I think I can live with having 2 witch-based shooters floating around out there. Magical Chase really feels like an amalgamation of different features from a bunch of different shooters put together into what I think turned out really well. For starters, the cute look of the game and the design of Ripple are again very reminiscent of Cotton, but not what I would call a direct copy. The Star Maidens act as two options that can not only fire in all directions, but can also absorb enemy bullets, so they're kind of like a mix of the options and Shield from Gradius. Plus, if you want, you can lock them in a certain position to keep them from moving around, which is great when you're in areas where you know enemies are going to be coming from mostly one direction. Another important feature in Magical Chase is the item system. Defeated enemies leave behind multicolored crystals, kind of like in Lords of Thunder, that can be collected and spent in a shop that is very reminiscent of the ones in Fantasy Zone or even Forgotten Worlds. Here you can buy lots of different weapon upgrades, health power-ups, and bombs, which are all extremely useful and eventually very necessary. Magical Chase is comprised of 6 stages, each with at least 2 boss battles. And while it's not exactly the most difficult shooter I've ever played, it is still a very challenging game, especially once you make it past stage 3. 2 things that make the difficulty more manageable are that you have infinite continues, and you don't lose anything when continuing, so you just go back to the beginning of the stage with all of the money and power-ups you previously earned still intact. There are 3 difficulty settings to choose from, so you can practice on the easy setting, but you won't be able to play past the 3rd stage. Overall, this is a very fun shooter that brings a lot of ideas together in a way that works very well. It's not my favorite shooter on the PC Engine, but I would be comfortable at least putting it in my top 10, which, considering how many good shooters there are on the PC Engine, is really high praise. This is a great looking game. As I said, it's a quote-unquote cute-em-up, so all of the character designs have a really cartoonish and childish look to them, which on the whole I like. I typically don't have a lot of complaints when it comes to this kind of design. All of the stages are very colorful, detailed, and look really nice, and I didn't experience any slowdown at all, which is always a plus. The sound design is also top-notch. The soundtrack is just great. Every song is good, and they have a very lighthearted and playful sound to them, which works perfectly in this type of game. The sound effects, while not the most impressive I've ever heard, are still pretty good, though the sound Ripple makes when she gets hit can get a little irritating over time. All things considered though, this game features some outstanding presentation, which I was pleasantly surprised by. So really, the only negative thing I can say about Magical Chase is that it's very hard to come by, and if you ever do, the price will be beyond unreasonable. Typically $300 on the low end for the Japanese version, all the way up to $1,000 or more for the TurboGrafx version, which needless to say is pure insanity. It really is a shame because this is an excellent game that I'm sure any shooter fan would definitely enjoy. So if you could possibly just borrow a copy from the internet for a little while, I wouldn't blame you. It's Magical Chase, and it's a whole lot of fun. Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope you brought your school spirit with you because today we're taking a look at Asuka 120% Burning Fest Limited for the Sega Saturn, a game about young girls duking it out in a school-sponsored fighting tournament in an effort to earn funding for their clubs. I find this funny because only a couple of the girls actually belong to martial arts clubs, so you'd think they'd be shoo-ins to beat the girls from the tennis and volleyball clubs. The main character is actually a member of the chemistry club, and she fights by burning her opponents with chemicals, which is excellent. This is just one in a very long line of Asuka games, all of which have been released in Japan only, and as a whole it's a series I really enjoy. This is a very fast-paced and combo-centric fighting game, but it features a very simple control scheme. There are only 3 attack buttons, light, medium, and heavy, and there's a high jump button. Just start with a light attack, which can be used in rapid succession, and chain into a longer combo. Each character also has a few special attacks that are executed with quarter circles and such, and they can be integrated into your combos as well. At the bottom of the screen, you have what appears to be your standard super combo meter, but the unique thing here is that at 100%, you can execute a single super move, but if you can hold out and make it to 120%, then you'll be able to execute as many super moves as possible within a limited amount of time. When both characters are at 120%, the match turns into Super Combo Fest, and dramatic comebacks are pretty common. There are only a couple of gameplay modes in Burning Fest Limited, essentially just arcade and versus modes, but because the gameplay is really fun, I don't mind that so much. A survival mode or a team battle mode would have been nice though. If I have a gripe with the gameplay itself, it would be that there's not a whole lot of options for fighting defensively. It's pretty much just constant offense, and if you slow down, you'll likely be squashed by the CPU, which is actually pretty tough in this game. But you could make the argument that the full throttle style is part of the charm of this game. Overall, it's a whole lot of fun, and the gameplay is simple enough that novices to the fighting genre should be able to get along just fine. Burning Fest Limited also features some pretty nice graphics. I really like the character designs, and they kinda remind me of Voltage Fighter Go Kaiser actually, and each character has a unique look and personality to match. The stages are really colorful with a lot of background details, and they reflect the various kinds of clubs that the girls belong to. Even what little animation there is in the game looks pretty good too. The sound design, courtesy of Mr. Keiichi Yanao, is pretty awesome. The soundtrack is 100% high-energy synth music, and it's awesome. It matches the speed of the gameplay perfectly, and it has just the right level of cheese. It's very 90s anime sounding. On the whole, despite being a game that was made with very limited means, it was actually designed and programmed largely by one guy, kind of like Guilty Gear. It doesn't really suffer for it. The presentation and gameplay are both great. I can easily recommend this game and series to fighting fans that are looking for something new that's easy to pick up and play. This particular version can be found online, usually for between 30 and 40 bucks, and the PlayStation titles, which are essentially the same as this one, can all be found for less than that, so by all means, there aren't enough Culpa-centric fighters in your collection, then definitely spring for Asuka 120% Burning Fest Limited, or Maxima Burning Fest, or Burning Fest Special, Burning Fest Excellent, Burning Fest Final, Burning Fest Exceptional, Burning Fest Yet Again, Burning Fest Part 2, Burning Fest 33 1/3, Burning Fest Painful.
我が手に落ちろ。燃えろ。Justice Gakuin!
Hey everybody, and welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Moero Justice Gakuin, also known as Project Justice on the Dreamcast. This is the third game in the Rival Schools series. It was developed and published by Capcom and released in Japan in late 2000 and everywhere else in 2001. The plot is set 1 year after the first game when an evil ninja master named Kudo and his reverse society are trying to take over Japan. But instead of a military coup or political upheaval, they're going to accomplish this by beating high school kids in street fights. Somehow. Not exactly a very deep or even coherent plot, but in this case, it's forgivable. Project Justice has a lot in common with its predecessors, as you might imagine. The controls are more or less unchanged, with 4 attack buttons, a sidestep button, and special attacks pulled straight from Street Fighter. The same basic combo system is still in place, as well as air and ground recoveries and air combos. The most significant change made to Project Justice is that now your team of fighters is 3 deep instead of just 2. This means that you can not only perform tag team attacks, but also triple team attacks with a full super combo meter, which is really cool. Also, this time around, you're actually given a brief chance to counter tag attacks, which is greatly appreciated. There are 2 main modes to choose from aside from Versus: the story mode, in which you choose predetermined teams, and the free mode, where you mix and match characters however you like. The roster is decent with 20 characters to start, and more to unlock with most of the original cast returning, and some nice new additions as well. Overall, the gameplay in Project Justice isn't a vast improvement over the first 2, but if it ain't broke, you don't fix it. This is a really fun fighter with some outstanding gameplay.
I got it!
One mode that's only available in the Japanese release of this game is the character creation mode, in which you create, edit, and upgrade your own fighter. Unlike the previous games, which had a school sim mode for this, Project Justice uses a board game setup where your character and others move around the board trying to collect stat boosts, special attacks, and cards which can be used to get a leg up on your opponents. You can interact with other characters on the board who may help or hinder you in some way, and you periodically get into fights with your opponents, which is decided by a combination of your stats and a kind of slot machine feature. This mode can be fun for a while, but if you're playing one of the Western versions that doesn't have it, you're not really missing all that much. The focus of this game is the fighting, which is the same regardless of which version you're playing. There are still plenty of other modes to choose from, like tournament, league, and training modes, and it's all good. Again, the gameplay is spot on, and that's what's most important. Graphically, this is what you'd expect as a jump from PS1 to Dreamcast. Characters are rendered well with plenty of detail and some pretty smooth animations. There's lots of color and flashy effects like in the previous games, and the stages look much nicer. You're still fighting on an infinite plane, but the stage itself doesn't feel so disjointed from the background like in the first two games, so overall some really great visuals. The sound design, on the other hand, I don't think quite lives up to the original, which had an awesome soundtrack with a lot of really catchy tunes. The soundtrack in Project Justice isn't bad. It does feature a handful of good tracks, but most of them are just kind of flat and uninteresting. So good visuals and the sound design at least gets a pass. So on the whole, this is a really enjoyable game, and one I'd recommend to fans of fighting games in general, and Capcom fighters in particular. Taking a look online, the US and European versions of Project Justice are going for $100 and over these days, and it's hard for me to recommend paying that much. But the Japanese version goes for about half of what the other versions go for, and comes with an additional gameplay mode, so that's definitely the way to go. If you love rival schools and you have to have more, then definitely go for Moero Justice Gakuen. It's awesome.
Continue. しっかりしろ。今ならまだ間に合う。Game over.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at City Hunter for the PC Engine. Released in 1989, it was developed and published by Sunsoft, and it's based on the late 80s series of manga and anime of the same name. It centers around the exploits of Ryo Saiba, a playboy and private investigator. He and his cohorts do their best to rid Tokyo of crime and make a decent living at the same time. The plot of the game is broken up into several chapters, with Ryo and company trying to take down a gang/mercenary group that's wreaking havoc in various locations around the city. If I only had one sentence to describe the gameplay in City Hunter, I'd say it's like a less linear Rolling Thunder. You run through the various stages, shooting enemies and checking doors, but instead of getting power-ups from going in the doors, you'll be talking to NPCs who will give you info on where to go next, who to talk to, and they'll also give you items such as keys that you'll need to progress through the stage. Essentially, each stage has multiple ascending levels that you'll be running back and forth between, trying to complete the various tasks necessary to grant you access to the end of the stage. Along the way, you'll be able to pick up a bazooka that's really helpful against stronger enemies, and you'll occasionally walk in on a naked woman, which completely replenishes your health. The first three stages can be played in any order, and after you beat all three, the fourth and final stage becomes available. That's really all there is to say about the gameplay. It's simple, repetitive, but fun, and you can finish this game in about 30 to 45 minutes. It didn't blow me away, but I did enjoy it. City Hunter is a decent looking game for an '89 release. A lot of the environments kind of run together. You'll see a lot of interiors and they're kind of bland. They don't lack detail, but they're not terribly colorful. The last stage, which features a lot of exteriors, is probably the best looking one. All of the characters look decent and the animations on Rio are pretty good, so the graphics are passable. The sound design I actually like quite a bit though. Sunsoft games always have good soundtracks. Regardless if it's during gameplay or just in the menus, every track sounds great and makes full use of the PC Engine sound chip. It's not exactly Blaster Master, but it is good. Overall, this is a pretty well made game with decent graphics and great sound design, as is per usual of Sunsoft. So this is a pretty fun action title for the PC Engine. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it is enjoyable. Unfortunately, looking online, it's actually a fairly expensive game. $40 on the low end, all the way up to $70, which I don't think it's worth. If you could find a copy for say $20 or less, then I'd say go for it, but other than that, maybe just browse around for a ROM and watch the City Hunter anime, read the manga, or watch the movie starring Jackie Chan. There's just so much to choose from. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Macross 2036 for the PC Engine CD. It was developed and published by Messiah and released in Japan only in 1992. It's obviously derived from the very long-running Macross anime series, known better to some as Robotech. And as the title implies, it's set in 2036, which puts it just a few years before Macross Plus. As you might expect, you play as a pilot for UN Spacey, heading out into space to continue humanity's colonization of the solar system. And wouldn't you know it, you run into yet another hostile group of aliens that you're obviously gonna have to destroy. Why can't they just listen to J-pop and be our friends? Macross 2036 is a fairly straightforward shooter. The 2-button fires your main weapon, which can be powered up by collecting the orange orbs that some enemies leave behind, and the 1-button fires your sub-weapons, though you don't actually have any in the first level. You have to buy them between levels with the points you earn by destroying enemies. There are a lot of weapons to choose from, but you can't use the same one 2 stages in a row. You have to choose a new one each time. Your sub-weapons do have infinite ammo, but a meter to the bottom left of the screen fills up as you use them, and the fuller it is, the less effective your weapons are. And needless to say, some of these weapons are awesome, and some of them are pretty useless. Boss battles are actually played very differently from the stages. Your ship changes into its mech form and fires its gun infinitely. Pressing the 1 and 2 buttons changes the angle of your shot in one direction or the other as you try to pick off the various sections of the boss. This is sometimes easier said than done, as you make for a pretty big target. it can actually get a little frustrating, but overall this game isn't so difficult, and it's pretty fun. It's not amazing or anything, but it is a solid shooter with good controls and reasonable level of challenge. So I definitely like it, though I'll admit that I probably wouldn't like it quite so much if it wasn't a Macross game. The presentation in Macross 2036 is really good. The graphics are very vibrant and colorful. A lot of the stages have really busy backgrounds with lots of stars, planets, and battleships. And there's a lot of multiple scrolling layers, which looks really nice. Being a PC Engine CD game based on an anime series, you can count on seeing a lot of anime-style cutscenes, which also look nice. They're not the best on the console, but they're still really good. They can be a bit long though, but thankfully they are skippable. The sound design is also great, again getting a big boost from being on CD. The music is awesome and very much in keeping with the Macross style. A lot of synthesizers and such. And all of the cutscenes are fully voiced, and there's a bit of voice work sprinkled into the stages as well. Plus you get some great sound effects too, lots of nice explosions. On the whole, great presentation on top of decent gameplay. So I can recommend this game to shooter fans. There are definitely better shoot 'em ups on the PC Engine, but this one isn't bad. You might want it just that much more though if you're a Macross fan. If you take a look online, you'll see that this game typically goes for between $40 and $60, which certainly isn't cheap, but compared to some other PC Engine shooters, it's not that outrageous. If you've got a Turbo Duo and you're in the market for some sweet anime-style shooting action, then you'll probably enjoy Macross 2036. Check it out.
Ninja Commando!
Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Ninja Commando for the Neo Geo CD. Originally released in arcades in 1992, it was published by SNK and developed by ADK, which is pretty apparent when you notice the subtle World Heroes references. You have three characters to choose from, Joe, Ryu, and Rayar, as they pursue the evil villain Spider and his Mars Corporation through time, trying to prevent them from altering history and dominating the world. This is an especially cool premise because it means you're gonna see a lot of different environments like ancient Egypt, feudal Japan, and even the Stone Age. Ninja Commando can best be described as a top-down run-and-gun game, kinda reminiscent of similar games like Commando, Ikari Warriors, and Shock Troopers. Essentially, just run through each level, blowing up and or killing everything in sight, and pick up power-ups as they present themselves. One thing worth mentioning is that you can't fire your weapon at full power with just one button press. You actually have to keep mashing the fire button to increase the power of your shot, so I hope your thumbs are excessively strong. You also have the ability to tuck and roll to avoid incoming attacks, very much like NAM 1975, and if you can go a few seconds without hitting the fire button, you can charge up for a power shot. Finally, at the cost of a bit of your health, you can perform a super powerful ninja magic attack, which is especially useful against the oversized and overpowered bosses in this game. This is an arcade port, so be ready to die a million times over, but you have infinite continues, so no worries there. Overall, the gameplay in Ninja Commando is outstanding. It's extremely fun, and it's actually one of my favorite games of this type. It's awesome. Presentation-wise, Ninja Commando is awesome again. The graphics are great with some very detailed and colorful stages, and each environment is very distinct from the others. Like I said before, a time travel premise always makes for some excellent stage variation. You'll battle against mummies and pharaohs, dinosaurs, Nobunaga Oda, and even some classic giant tanks and robots, etc. And they all look great. The sound design is also really good, as is typically the case with ADK games. The soundtrack is really high energy, and each track reflects the era it's set in, so you'll never be hearing the same track twice, and on the whole it all sounds fantastic. The sound effects and voice samples are really great too, so just like the gameplay, there's not a whole lot to complain about. This game looks great and sounds great, in my humble opinion, of course. So, as if it wasn't already apparent, I highly recommend playing this game, especially if you're a fan of this run and gun style. It's great fun. It is a tad expensive these days though, between $70 and $100 usually for the CD version, and over $1,000 for the AES. Luckily though, it is available on the Wii Virtual Console, and it's also a part of the ADK PS2 compilation called ADK Tamashi, so you can play it without breaking the bank, thankfully. If you're craving some high-intensity arcade ninja action, then definitely spring for a copy of Ninja Commando, and get ready for fun. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Last Resort for the Neo Geo CD. This shoot 'em up was developed and published by SNK and released in 1992, and it's of course also available for the AES and MVS. The plot is set sometime in the future when a computer virus has taken over a man-made space colony, including all of its defense capabilities, and now it's attacking the Earth. You are mankind's last defense against this cyber invader. It's a pretty cool plot for a shooter, and it makes possible environments and enemies pulled straight out of films like Blade Runner and Terminator. Very cool. The first word that comes to mind when I think of Last Resort is difficult. This is a really tough shooter. I actually think it was SNK's goal to make their own version of Gradius. The main thing that makes it so tough is that you die with one hit, and then you're sent back to a checkpoint with all of your power-ups taken away. And speaking of power-ups, there are a variety of them in Last Resort. You'll get lasers, missiles, and best of all, an orb that follows your ship and can fire in all directions. This orb also acts as a shield and can deflect smaller attacks, and you can even charge it up and launch it at your enemies to do a ton of damage. How far you're able to get in this game really hinges on how effectively you can use the orb. There are certain sections that are pretty much impossible to get through without it. Aside from that, this is a really straightforward shooter with some tight controls and fun gameplay. It's just a tad frustrating at times. You really need a lot of repeat playthroughs to get all of the patterns down. At the end of each stage is a boss battle with some sort of huge machine that has a weak spot that you have to aim for to cause damage, and these can also be really challenging and a lot of fun. Overall, this is a really exceptional shoot 'em up. I had a lot of fun with it and hurled quite a few expletives at my TV screen at the same time. Last Resort sports some pretty excellent graphics, especially considering it came out in 1992. I would have thought it was released at least a few years later. All of the stages are very detailed and feature a wide variety of designs and color schemes. I especially love the first stage, which looks like a scene straight out of Blade Runner. And I absolutely love the boss designs, my favorite again being from the first stage. You fight the giant torso of a Terminator that shoots at you with its spinal cord and vomits scrap metal at you. Excellent. The sound design is also outstanding. This is probably one of the better soundtracks you're going to hear on a Neo Geo game. I'm actually surprised it didn't get a CD release. You'll hear plenty of techno and even some borderline heavy metal / industrial tracks. On the whole, this is a very well made game with some outstanding graphics and sound, in addition to its awesome gameplay. I can easily recommend this game to fans of old school, hyper difficult shoot 'em ups. It's great. Taking a look online, the CD version is the cheapest, as is pretty much always the case. It goes for about $50 on average versus the several hundred for the AES cartridge. So if you're in the market for a fun, difficult, and all-around kick-ass shooter, then SNK has got you covered. It's last resort, and it's awesome. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Ghost Pilots for the Neo Geo CD. Developed and published by SNK, it was released in arcades and on consoles in 1991. It's set during World War II and has you playing as an ace mercenary pilot, taking on the Nazis in your kick-ass seaplane. And that's about it. It's light on plot, but who really cares? It's a shoot 'em up. You are good. Everything else is bad. Seek and destroy. This premise has been used to striking effect in, every other shooter ever. And it still hasn't worn thin. It's amazing. Ghost Pilots is a real throwback shooter. It's very reminiscent of Capcom's 1940 series. The gameplay is extremely simple. You start with a weak shot, and as you destroy enemies and strings of red planes in particular, you get power-ups that increase the spread of your shot. You don't get any fancy lasers or flamethrowers, no choice of power-ups. You've just got that one basic shot type. You also have a number of different types of bombs to choose from depending on what stage you're playing. They're all really destructive, and you can earn more as you play through each stage. Other than that, there's not much to say about Ghost Pilots. It's a very bare-bones shooter, but still really fun. One thing that I don't like, though, is that you return to your starting power level after getting hit just once. This makes Ghost Pilots a much more difficult game. Eventually, the difficulty really starts to ramp up, and you're bombarded with tons of enemies and bullets, and you just feel ill-equipped to deal with everything that's being thrown at you, when all you have to defend yourself is your basic pea shooter. So this is a fun shoot 'em up, but also an incredibly frustrating one at times. Ghost Pilots features some pretty decent presentation. The graphics are nice. There are lots of different planes and tanks that are all World War II appropriate and look good. The bosses, on the other hand, are gigantic and more fantastic, with all kinds of weapons slapped all over them. The stages look great and typically feature a lot of color and detail. Despite not being set in space or the future, it's still visually interesting. The sound design is pretty good too. The soundtrack doesn't exactly stand out or anything, but it's not bad. It never got irritating or unpleasant, but it didn't knock my socks off either. The sound effects are pretty great though. The sounds of the planes, tanks, and explosions are all really good and powerful sounding. So on the whole, these aren't exactly the best graphics you'll see on the system or the best songs you'll hear on it, but for what it is and when it came out, it's perfectly acceptable. So this is a really simple, challenging, and fun game. It's not the first shooter on the console that I'd recommend, but it is enjoyable. If you take a look online, it can be found on CD for about $50. and more for the MVS and AES carts. So if you can spare the cash and you like old school WW2 shoot 'em ups, then Ghost Pilots might just be right up your alley. Check it out. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Mobile Suit Gundam Seed for the PlayStation 2. It's obviously based on the series of anime of the same name. It was developed and published by Bandai and released in Japan only in 2003. The plot centers around the war between the humans of Earth and the genetically altered superhumans known as coordinators who inhabit space colonies of their own design. Main character Kira Yamato, a coordinator himself and member of the totally neutral Orb Union, ends up piloting a Gundam by chance to protect his friends from an attacking army. After their home is destroyed, they set out on the battleship known as the Archangel and set a course for Earth, and many battles ensue in the interim. There are two different gameplay styles in Gundam Seed, but for the most part, it's a side-scrolling action game. You choose from 4 different weapon types, and then you head into battle, moving from one section to the next and destroying the other mobile suits. You have a ranged attack in the form of various beam rifles, and a melee attack in the form of beam swords and daggers. Enemies come from left and right, but they'll also populate the background and attempt to shoot you from afar, in which case you'll need to lock onto them and take them out from a distance. You essentially have 2 health bars. Only after your energy shield is destroyed does your health start to deplete. You can perform a power attack that costs you a bit of health, a la Final Fight, and after defeating enough enemies, you'll go into Berserk mode and deal a lot of extra damage. At the end of each level, you'll either have a boss to destroy or you'll be tasked with defending the Archangel. Gundam Seed starts out easy enough, but gets more difficult as you go on, with an ever-increasing volume of enemies and bullets to contend with. Aside from the side-scrolling levels, you'll also occasionally play through some rail shooter stages. You have a full range of movement, and you'll be dividing your attention between blasting enemies and dodging incoming projectiles. Sometimes the enemies will come in close, in which case you can move in and take them out with your beam sword. There's not much else to say about these segments, just blast everything in sight and keep moving. There is a versus mode included in Gundam Seed, but it's no different from the side-scrolling levels. It controls the exact same. It's a distraction and nothing more. Overall, Gundam Seed's gameplay is pretty mindless, but also pretty fun. It's a pick-up-and-play type game. Nothing too mind-blowing, but it is enjoyable. I don't love it, but I do like it. The graphics in Gundam Seed are pretty good. 2D/3D hybrid games can be kind of underwhelming, but it's appropriate here and not that bad. The cutscenes are a mix of full animation, which looks really nice and is very much appreciated, 2D stills, which aren't as nice but at least don't populate the entire game, and fully rendered 3D cutscenes, which look pretty good too. The soundtrack is also pretty decent. It's all techno tunes which match the source material and the action, and there's a ton of voice acting from the Japanese cast of the anime, which is always greatly appreciated. On the whole, just like the gameplay, the presentation is good. Not great, but I like it. So this is a fairly fun game with some decent presentation. It's nothing too amazing, and non-Gundam fans would probably rather play something else. No shortage of side-scrolling action titles out there, but if you are a fan of the series and think you might like this one, the good news is that copies can be found online for no more than $10, so it's not a huge gamble. If there aren't enough giant robot action titles in your collection, then by all means get yourself a copy of Mobile Suit Gundam Seed. More robots than you can shake a beam sword at. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at one of my absolute favorite beat-em-ups, and that's Mutation Nation on the Neo Geo CD. It was originally released in Japan in 1991 and in 1992 everywhere else, and it was developed and published by SNK. And between this, Burning Fight, and Robo Army, I'd say they definitely know their way around a beat-em-up. The plot to this one is really cool. A mad scientist has flooded a city with all kinds of crazy mutants and robots of his own design. So it's up to Ricky and Johnny, players 1 and 2 respectively, to fight them all back and keep them from spreading all across the nation. It almost sounds like the plot to a Trauma movie. This is especially awesome because instead of just beating up generic thugs, you'll be taking on all manner of hideous creatures and so forth. At its core, Mutation Nation is a fairly standard beat-em-up as far as gameplay goes. You have an attack button and a jump button. Beat the hell out of every enemy that comes onto the screen and move on until it's time for a boss fight. Wash, rinse, and repeat. Where it differs from most other games in the genre is that there are no weapons to be found in the game. Instead, you can pick up orbs that allow you to perform screen-clearing super attacks by charging the attack button. And each color grants you a different attack. You can perform a power move after you've run out of orbs as well, but you'll sacrifice a bit of health. There are also orange orbs that either restore a bit of health, or if your health is already full, it adds an extra stock to your power moves. This feature, added on top of what's already a solid playing game, just makes Mutation Nation that much more enjoyable. The difficulty is pretty much what you'd expect from a direct arcade port, though you can tone it down if you want to, and you well might. Some of these bosses can get pretty frustrating. Regardless though, Mutation Nation is a really solid beat 'em up and very fun. It's not as well known as Final Fight or Streets of Rage, but I think it should be. Mutation Nation features some pretty outstanding presentation. The character sprites, for starters, are really big, especially the bosses, and feature a pretty high level of detail and some very cool designs. The final boss in particular looks really awesome. He's like a mix between the Queen Alien and something out of John Carpenter's The Thing. The stages also look really good. Again, a lot of little details, a lot of color, and some nice scrolling effects. The sound design is great too. The soundtrack has a lot of high energy, catchy tunes that match the action really well. A proper soundtrack is important to my enjoyment of a beat 'em up, so I'm really pleased with this one. I actually think it's comparable to Fatal Fury's soundtrack. A big draw of these Neo Geo games is that they're supposed to be arcade perfect. I've never played the arcade version of this one, but I have to assume there's not a huge difference. Also, despite the fact that this is being played on a Neo Geo CD, it's not filled with tons of loading screens, which is a huge plus. So this is a game that I highly recommend, especially to lovers of the old school beat 'em up style. If you want a copy for yourself, the CD version will probably run you about $60, which isn't exactly what I would call cheap, but when compared to the few hundred you'd have to spend on the AES version, it's downright reasonable. If you're in the mood to bash in the heads of some mutant freaks with extreme prejudice, Mutation Nation just might be the game for you. Check it out. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Ketsui Kizuna Chigoku Tachi Extra for the Xbox 360. This cave-developed bullet hell shooter was originally released in arcades in 2002, and this version, released in 2009, was handled by 5PB, who also developed the Bullet Soul games, so they definitely know their way around a shooter. The plot is set in 2054 after global warming has ravaged the Earth and World War III has broken out. The war seems indefinite because the world's richest and most powerful arms dealer is constantly keeping it going, so some mercenaries are hired by the UN to destroy the company's bases, bring down their infrastructure, and hopefully put an end to WW3. A cautionary tale indeed. Ketsui has a lot in common with other cave shooters, in particular the Dodonpachi series. It's actually almost identical to the first couple of games in that series. You have two ships to choose from, one that's faster but has a narrow shot, and a slower ship that has a wider spread shot. Both ships have two fire modes, a powerful lock-on shot that slows your movement a bit, and a weaker shot that doesn't. And of course you have a stock of bombs that do massive damage, clear bullets from the screen, and grant you some brief invulnerability. One cool feature in Ketsui is that numbered point bonuses fall out of destroyed enemies, and the closer you are to the enemy when you destroy them, the higher the number is, which encourages you to get right up on them and blast everything as quickly as you can, which makes for some really fast and frantic gameplay. There are two gameplay modes to choose from in Ketsui Extra, the original arcade mode and the more difficult X mode, which I don't think is totally necessary. This game is hard enough as it is. There are always a ton of enemies and bullets on screen at any one given time, and the bosses are massive and very challenging. This is a game that definitely lives up to the label of bullet hell. It's difficult, overwhelming at times, and very fun. Overall, Ketsui doesn't do anything really all that unique, but it does do everything really well, which is pretty much what you'd expect from a cave/5PB game. The visuals in Ketsui are pretty nice, but a bit on the conservative side, at least as far as the stages go. It's a lot of military bases, shipyards, and collections of warehouses, which aren't exactly the most vibrant of locations. But on the plus side, the brightly colored bullets stand out really well against the comparatively drab stages, so it all evens out. The sound design is great. The soundtrack is an excellent collection of techno tunes that go from really passive and groovy 1 minute to really high energy the next, but always sounds good. And on top of that, there are some really good and explosive sound effects. So on the whole, some really exceptional presentation. So this is an outstanding bullet hell shooter. It's a lot of fun and comes highly recommended by me. The 360 version is unfortunately not region free, but in 2013 it was brought over to the PS3, which is region free. So you have a couple of options if you want to get a copy for yourself. Regardless of what you're playing it on though, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a great time with Ketsui Kizuna Jikokutachi Extra. It's frantic, it's explosive, and it's awesome. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Daiku no Gensan for the Famicom. It was developed and published by Irem in 1990, and you might know it better as Hammerin' Harry. Games in this series, like the releases for the arcade and Game Boy, were released worldwide, but this one was only released in Japan and Europe. Though later games would feature Gensan fighting ghosts or being launched into outer space, this one has him fighting an evil corporation in Japan, and occasionally rescuing his very easily kidnapped girlfriend. It might not be the deepest plot in the world, but then again, it's about a guy with a giant hammer taking on an evil, wheelchair-bound businessman, so it all evens out. The gameplay in Daiku no Gensan is simple enough. It's a pretty straightforward action platformer. Gensan can obviously attack enemies with his giant hammer from both standing and crouching positions, but that's not all. He can also hold it over his head to block attacks coming from the air, and hold it in front of him to block incoming projectiles, and this is especially useful if you get the power-up that makes your hammer grow to huge proportions. There are plenty of other power-ups scattered around each stage that allow you to swing your hammer in a circular motion or give you an extra hit point, for example. The stage layouts are nice, and there are boss battles at the end of each stage, followed by bonus minigames that always have you trying to rescue Gensan's unfortunate girlfriend. It's fun, but definitely not perfect. My biggest complaint is that the controls can be a bit stiff, especially when it comes to controlling your jumps. Not something you really want in a platformer. It can also be a bit frustrating at times in areas where it feels like there's no way to avoid taking damage. These gripes aside though, I do like Daiku no Gensan. It is fun. I just think it could have been a bit better. The presentation in Daiku no Gensan, like the gameplay, is good, but not great. It's a colorful enough game, and the character sprites are pretty large. They just kind of lack detail. I just can't help but think of games like Kid Dracula, for example, that were released around the same time, but had a much cleaner look. But on the other hand, this game doesn't suffer from the flicker and slowdown that some other titles did. Still, the graphics are decent, and the design of the stages and characters is charming. The sound design is actually pretty good. Irem games aren't always the best looking or playing, but they do pretty much always have good soundtracks. Every song on this one is lighthearted and matches the tone of the game without any really annoying tracks. Even the sound effects and voice samples are good as well. On the whole, this definitely isn't the best presentation you'll find in an 8-bit game, but I'd still say it's slightly above average for its day. I'd recommend this game to fans of old school 8-bit platformers. It's good fun, and while you're at it, you might want to try the other games in the series for the Game Boy, Super Famicom, and more recently, the PSP. As far as this game is concerned, the PAL versions go for no less than $100 on eBay. But the Famicom version, the loose card at least, can typically be found for between $30 and $40. So if you're looking for a new 8-bit platformer to have some fun with, then Daiku no Gensan might just be exactly what you're looking for. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at Chojin Gakuen Go Kaiser for the Neo Geo CD, also known as Voltage Fighter Go Kaiser. It was released in Japan and North America in 1995, and it's the second one-on-one fighter for the system to be developed by Technos, with the first one being Double Dragon. If you're not familiar with the game, you might be more familiar with the anime that was released as a tie-in. It was pretty good, and it was produced by the same animation studio as the 3 Fatal Fury OVAs. The plot is kind of nonsensical, but just keep in mind superpowers and boobs, and you've pretty much got the gist of it. Go Kaiser is a fairly standard fighting game for the most part. You have 10 characters to choose from, and in the single player mode you can actually face your opponents in whatever order you like. This is a 4-button fighter with 2 buttons for punching and 2 for kicking, and every character has an array of Street Fighter style special moves, and when your health is in the red you can perform a super attack, although they seem a tiny bit useless to me. For the most part they're actually really difficult to land, but other than that the game plays really well. The controls are tight and responsive, and the characters are quite varied. One cool feature in Go Kaiser is that after you defeat an opponent in single player mode, you have the option to take one of their special moves and add it to your own moveset. But you can only have one extra attack at a time. And just a word to the wise, I'd go for Shia's Ball Boy attack. It's just about the most spammable move in the game. Overall, Voltage Fighter Go Kaiser is a really fun fighter. I wouldn't put it on par with Street Fighter 2, but it's definitely one that I don't mind playing every so often. It regularly stops to load, assuming you're playing the CD version, but other than that, there's not much to complain about when it comes to the gameplay. This is a pretty good looking game. If nothing else, I can say that the stages are really colorful and detailed with a lot of background animation. They're really nice. The character sprites are large, and the designs of the characters themselves are pretty cool. You get everything from scantily clad women to an Ultraman clone. And the camera moves in and out as the fight goes on, just like in The Art of Fighting. Not many complaints with the visual design of the game, but I think it's trumped by the sound design. The soundtrack is really awesome, with pretty much every song being good. Most of them actually have vocal tracks, and it's pure, cheesy 90s anime goodness. I really like it. And of course, it's all CD quality. In fact, the soundtrack did get a separate release on CD. Overall, this is a well-made game, which is what I'd expect from Technos. So we've got some great visuals and sound design on top of some decent gameplay. So I definitely recommend this game to fighting fans that feel like they've already played everything out there, especially if you enjoy a lot of SNK's early 90s fighters, because this one really has a lot in common with those. Looking online, the US version goes for over $100, which I wouldn't recommend paying for it, but the Japanese version is typically no more than $40, and the Neo Geo CD is region free, so that's definitely the version to go for. There's even a PS1 port that also goes for about $40 on average, so you've at least got some options. If you're in need of a little fighting action coupled with laser beams, superheroes, robots, spirit animals, and a few bouncing cans thrown in for good measure, then I think Voltage Fighter Go Kaiser is exactly what you're looking for. Check it out. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I hope I have some cat lovers in the house because we're taking a look at Kyato Ninden Teande, which translates to Cat Ninja Legend, but Western audiences might know it better as Samurai Pizza Cats, former Saturday morning cartoon. This 8-bit adaptation was developed and published by Tecmo and released in Japan only in 1991. The setting is a city known as Eteropolis, which is populated by cybernetic animal people. There's an evil fox prime minister that wants to take over the city, so the head of the Imperial Guard enlists the help of ninja cats that work at a local pizzeria. So yeah, very interesting plot brought to you by the fine folks at Tatsunoko. Put simply, Samurai Pizza Cats is basically like a much easier Ninja Gaiden. It's an action platformer with the exact same control scheme. A jumps, B attacks, and pressing up and B at the same time performs a ninja magic attack. Collecting ninja magic icons increases the power of your magic attacks, and there are separate icons to refill your magic energy. Each of the game's 3 selectable characters have their own unique attacks, and aside from them, there are 5 additional characters that you can switch to during gameplay that also have their own attacks, and each one has a special ability as well, like flying or smashing large rocks, for example. These support characters can only be used as long as there's energy in the support meter, and this too can be refilled by picking up bell icons, and each of the 8 stages ends with a boss battle. The only drawback here is that this game is really easy and can be finished in about 45 minutes. But aside from that, it features some good controls and fun gameplay. Though you'll probably feel the urge to play Ninja Gaiden after you finish it, just to give yourself a decent challenge. Samurai Pizza Cats features the kind of presentation you'd probably expect from an 8-bit Tecmo game. It's really good. The graphics are very colorful in keeping with its animated roots. Every stage has a unique look, all of the character designs are great, and the sprites are pretty large as well. There are also plenty of cinematic cutscenes which again look really nice and are super colorful. The sound design is excellent, again exactly what you'd expect from Tecmo. Lots of upbeat and catchy tunes that match the lighthearted feel of the material really well, coupled with some top-notch sound effects. Overall, there's really nothing to complain about when it comes to the presentation here. As far as 8-bit games go, Samurai Pizza Cats is well above average in both visuals and audio. So I wholeheartedly recommend this game to 8-bit platforming fans. It's a lot of fun. Like I said, it was only released in Japan, but it doesn't really require any Japanese comprehension to play. And there are English translation patches out there if you're really intent on getting all of the story. Loose carts can be found online, usually for between $30 and $40. So if you're looking for a fun wacky, cat-based action platformer to add to your 8-bit library, then definitely spring for a copy of Kyoto Ninden Teyande. It's more fun than a ball of yarn rolled in catnip. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today you can just call me Saint Jim, because we're taking a look at the one and only, aside from the sequels, Saint Seiya Chapter Sanctuary for the PlayStation 2. Developed by Dimps and published by Bandai, it was released in 2005 and was released in Europe as well, complete with a whole host of language options, but unfortunately, it never made its way to North American shores. The plot centers around the title character Seiya and the other bronze saints of Athena as they engage in cosmic battles with the silver and gold saints, gods, and all the armies that come with them, and everything has the motif of Greek mythology and symbols of the zodiac. It's one of the all-time greats in the anime and manga world. Saint Seiya is a really flashy and simplified 3D fighter. You have two normal attack buttons, light and heavy, that can be chained into long combos, and you have a special attack button that lets you perform different techniques when combined with the different directional buttons. But you can only perform them when your power meter, located at the bottom of the screen, fills up. It's divided into 3 different sections, and the fuller it is, the more powerful the attack, and you can charge it up by simply holding down one of the attack buttons. Other than that, you have buttons mapped to block and dash. The real fun of the gameplay, as far as I'm concerned, is trying to land your character's super powerful and over-the-top big bang attacks. When your special move meter is full, you hold down the special attack button as long as you can to charge up for the move, and the longer you hold it, the more devastating the move will be, assuming you're using a character that has multiple big bang attacks. Some have 1, some have 2, and others have 3. You do have a chance to defend against them via a time button press, followed by a power struggle, but if you fail, then get ready to take some serious damage. Another cool feature in Saint Seiya is how matches end. With all those super powerful moves flying around, you can't just have people getting knocked out in one go. Matches would be over far too quickly, so instead, you have a chance to get back up after being knocked down, kind of like in a boxing game, which I really like. It keeps the matches going. You've only got 5 characters to choose from in the versus mode to start with, but you unlock a bunch more in the story mode, which is pretty awesome as far as fighting game story modes go. It plays out like a series of episodes of the anime and features some good, but rather lengthy cutscenes. Overall, the gameplay in Chapter Sanctuary is really simple, but fun. If you're looking for another Tekken or Virtua Fighter, you won't find it here, but what you will find is definitely not your average fighting game. It's a bit hit or miss sometimes, but overall I do like it. The presentation, in my opinion, is where Chapter Sanctuary really shines. 2D to 3D translations of anime aren't always great, but I think it was done really well here, which isn't all that surprising when you consider that Dimps also developed the Dragon Ball Z Budokai games. The cutscenes are lengthy but still entertaining. The characters and environments are well representative of the source material, and again, the Big Bang attacks look really cool. The soundtrack is decent. A lot of the music is actually recycled from the anime, and the music that's new to the game is pretty forgettable, but at least appropriate for the game, and there's a lot of outstanding voice acting all throughout. Overall, Chapter Sanctuary has fairly fun gameplay with a whole lot of flashy effects and fan service thrown on top, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. So this is a pretty enjoyable game. It's nothing mind-blowing as far as gameplay goes, but it is fun. Really though, this is a game that's meant for fans of the series. I said once before about a Naruto game that I reviewed that above all else, it's a Naruto game. Well, above all else, this is a Saint Seiya game. Keep that in mind going in and you'll have a good time. Looking online, it's not a terribly expensive game either, usually going for between 20 and 40 bucks. So if you're a fan of the anime, then by all means get yourself a copy of Saint Seiya Chapter Sanctuary and get ready to see stars. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at the PC Engine shooter known as Download. It was brought to us by NEC Avenue and Alpha System, and it was released in Japan only in 1990. There's also a sequel for the PC Engine CD, but we'll get around to that. The plot of Download centers around Sid, who's not only an ace pilot, but also a cyber diver, meaning he can connect his brain to computer systems and even other people's brains to dive in and take care of problems. It actually has a lot in common with anime like Ghost in the Shell and Psycho Diver, and the plot is moved along between levels by some rather cool looking cutscenes, and the occasional casual swearing. Download is a pretty straightforward shooter with a couple of features that make it stand out from the crowd, aside from its cool visual design and plot. Before each level, you have the opportunity to choose from a couple of main weapons and 3 sub-weapons that all have limited ammo. There's a mega bomb, homing missiles, and a shield that can be moved around to protect different sections of your ship. Each stage is populated with power-ups that can restore a bit of your health, refill your sub-weapon ammo, power up your main weapon, and even grant you some brief invulnerability. And of course, every stage comes complete with a boss that has lots of smaller sections to destroy before you can take out its core. You have infinite continues, and there's a password system, so if you're persistent, you'll be able to make it through this one. It's actually one of the easier shooters I've played for the PC Engine, but that aside, it's really good. It controls well, the power-up system is great, all of the weapons are useful, and it's not so easy that it ever becomes boring. There are so many shooters for the console that it's easy for some to get lost in the shuffle, like this one apparently did, but I'm here to tell you that it's every bit as good as some of the more popular titles in the genre. Download is a pretty good looking game. I really like the cyberpunk visual style being used in it. All of the stages look great with plenty of color, detail, and some really cool scrolling effects. The enemy designs are good for the most part, though some are a little unintelligible. The cutscenes look awesome. I really like the character designs and color schemes used. It actually reminds me a bit of Akira at points, which is definitely a good thing. The soundtrack is also awesome. It's mostly really high-tempo tunes that have kind of a 16-bit heavy metal sound to them, and all of the tracks sound great, and the sound effects are good as well. Overall, for a game that I knew nothing about going in, I was pleasantly surprised by how good the presentation is. Again, it's on par with a lot of more well-known shooters. So, this is an excellent game, and well worthy of any good PC Engine collection, especially if you're a fan of the system's many shooters. Prices online are kind of all over the place, anywhere from 30 to 60 bucks, so happy hunting if you go looking for a copy. I'd say it's worth at least 30, it's a lot of fun. Like I said, I'll eventually cover the sequel, which is pretty different and totally insane in its own way. But until then, I highly recommend that everybody go out of their way to play Download. It's awesome.
Are you ready, true believers? Capcom and Marvel have joined forces once again to bring you Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter! Surprise! Attack! Adventure! Don't miss out on the enjoyment of a lifetime! Behold, amazing fantasy! Don't miss the most amazing tag team fighting game ever! Are you ready for a new challenger? Now, experience Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter!
Hey everybody, and welcome to the 100th review here on Shoreviewken. Since I started this thing with X-Men vs. Street Fighter, I figured I'd move on to the follow-up title, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter for the Sega Saturn. It was developed and published by Capcom, first in arcades in 1997, and this version was released in Japan only in 1998, with the PlayStation version coming out a year after that. Just like its predecessor, this game can only be played on the Saturn with the aid of the 4MB RAM expansion card, which results in what's basically an arcade-perfect port. MSH vs. Street Fighter is your basic Capcom 2D tag fighter, i.e. it's awesome. You initially have 18 characters to choose from, with more to unlock, and you can mix and match however you want. You can tag your partners in and out, call them in for assist moves, and even combine their super combos for some epic looking attacks. That's the major difference between this and the PS1 version. That one lacks the tag feature. There are some minor graphical differences as well, but that's the one that really hurts. Also, the Saturn features an exclusive character in the form of Narimaru, a popular Japanese comedian at the time. His addition is really quizzical to me, but he is fun to play as. I personally like teaming him up with Dan Hibiki. The only complaints I have is that there are only 3 gameplay modes, arcade, versus, and survival. Tournament and training modes would have been nice, and Apocalypse is recycled as the boss character, though we do get the introduction of Mecha Goki, which is really awesome. Really though, any complaint I could come up with is just nitpicking. This game is crazy fun with some very tight controls, and again, it's arcade perfect on the Saturn. Honestly, I think Capcom's mid and late 90s fighters are some of the best ever made, and this one's no exception.
Let's rock. Variable combination finish! KO! Oh,
One for JJ. Shoreviewken.
variable combination finish! KO! Can win!
The presentation in MSH vs. Street Fighter is really good, but again I have to complain about recycling. Most, if not all of the stages featured in the game are recycled from X-Men vs. Street Fighter. They look great and all, it's just that we've seen them before. There are a few little added details like characters populating the background, but on the whole there's not much difference. It's still a good looking game though, with a lot of color, great detail on all of the characters, and thanks to the RAM cart, super smooth animations and no slowdown. The sound design is really good too. We get another great soundtrack from Alpha Lyla. Each character has their own specific tune, and they all sound good, as does all of the voice acting and the sound effects. Though this is one area where recycling would have actually been appreciated, because I do prefer the soundtracks from Marvel Superheroes and X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Still, this game features some outstanding presentation to complement its great gameplay.
Win!
So it should go without saying that I love this game and highly recommend it to any and all fighting game fans. It's an absolute classic. If you take a look at eBay, it can be a bit pricey. Regardless if you're looking for a US or Japanese copy, it'll usually run you between 40 and 60 bucks, or if you manage to find it in an arcade of all places, 50 cents. Either way, you're guaranteed to have a great time. It's Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, and it's awesome. And thanks for sticking around for 100 reviews. I hope to see you all back here for number 200.